Hugh Neutron. He's a simple, happy-go-lucky kind of guy whose biggest passions in life are ducks and his wife's pie. He's a family man who's known for his positive demeanor and quirky nature. I mean, he may be kind of clueless at times and cause quite a bit of chaos by messing with his son's inventions when he doesn't know what he's doing, but all things considered, he usually means well. He was a character that I always appreciated when watching this show. Not only because he was usually a main driving plot point behind the episode, but also because he's portrayed as a fantastic father figure for Jimmy and a pretty stellar husband to his wife, Judy. Throughout the series, we would see Hugh doing his best to be a supportive father. Sure, he might not be able to help Jimmy with his homework or anything like that, but emotionally, he's 100% there, and he's definitely good for some useful, if not entertaining advice. In the years that I've been making these videos, I've come across some really terrible cartoon dads, some of which the entire plot of the show is basically driven by them being a lousy parent. Meanwhile, Hugh Neutron was usually portrayed as a rather positive driving force behind the show. He's a character that I've always appreciated, but I've grown a lot more respect for over the years. He's not perfect by any means, but he is a pretty top-notch dad. And that's why today, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're gonna check out an episode of Jimmy Neutron that really puts into perspective how great of a dad and husband that Hugh is. But first, I just want to say thank you so much for clicking on this video and for being a part of my YouTube journey. I totally appreciate you being here, and I hope that you're having a fantastic day. We're gonna be checking out the Season 1 episode, Time is Money. This episode starts out in the afternoon at the Neutron household, where Jimmy is watching a long discussion about electromagnetic balance in the left hemisphere of the brain with his friends, who look just so excited to be there.
Hey, Jimmy, you think you could come up with an invention, that changes the channel? I don't know, maybe like, a remote control?
Yeah, Jim, this is informative and all, but I think I'd rather be covered in bees. And I'm allergic.
Well, it wasn't all painfully horrible, Jimmy. I like the part about the medulla oblongata. I don't know what it means, but I love the way it sounds. Back, or I will slay thee with my medulla oblongata.
Jimmy asks what they want to watch, and they respond with literally anything else but this. Just as Jimmy goes to change the channel though, he's stopped dead in his tracks by an infomercial that has him immediately captivated. The commercial promises the sucker watching that they could obtain all of the information in the universe through their purchase of the 1,000 volume set of the Encyclopedia of Infinite Knowledge.
What ancient civilization built an entire royal palace from shredded wheat? What species of owl can be milked like a cow? Where is Waldo? That's right, 1,000 volumes. Just order now, and you'll receive a new volume every week for 19.23 years. The Encyclopedia of Infinite Knowledge. Order now, or you're an idiot.
Jimmy gets right up to go talk to his mom about it, and next thing you know, we see her calling the 1-800 number to ask about the encyclopedias. However, as soon as they tell her the cost, she basically says thanks anyway and hangs up. Seconds later, we see Jimmy go to the garage to ask his dad about it.
Yeah, well, Jimmy, your mother sort of keeps track of the finances, and I don't.
Dad, they're educational. Encyclopedias are an investment.
Yeah, but they make my brain twitch. Now, what you want to do, Jimmy, is be thankful for the things you already have.
Hugh explains to his son that everyone in life wants things. He himself would love to have a 6-foot-tall duck sculpture and a lifetime supply of pie, but unfortunately they just don't have that kind of money. Jimmy laments the fact that his parents don't have room in their budget for the obnoxiously expensive encyclopedias, saying that he wishes that they were rich.
There was a time, Jim, when that was almost a reality. Years ago I almost invested in McSpanky's Burger Factory.
McSpanky's? Really?
Sure. 15 years ago, I picked up a scruffy-looking McSpanky on the side of the road. He didn't have a penny to his name, told me all about this grand scheme he had to assembly line hard little tasteless burger patties to the masses, disguising them with inexpensive condiments and yummy buns. He offered me a full partnership for $50 of startup money and a back rub.
Jimmy questions him making the decision to not invest in McSpanky's, and Hugh says that he almost did, but then he decided to use that money for a more important reason.
Man has to have his priorities.
I need money is what I need.
Back in the treehouse, we see Jimmy venting to Goddard about how unfair he thinks it is that his family isn't rich. After stewing on it for a bit, Jimmy realizes that he has an invention that he thinks will solve the problem. He gets the idea to go back in time and convince his dad to invest his money in McSpanky's Burger Factory.
Gentlemen, I give you the time booth. Just punch in the time and visit the period of your choosing. Go on, step inside.
Has this thing been tested by an independent laboratory?
Who cares, Carl? Where we going, Jimmy?
Jimmy explains that his dad met Hank McSpanky 15 years ago, so he sets their destination to 15 years in the past, and off they go. They arrive in his parents' house 15 years prior, and his friends ask why the past is so dark. Jimmy explains that his lab actually used to be a basement before he was born, and the three of them head upstairs to find his parents.
I just love those three guys with the high-pitched female-type voices. Like to eat pie. Check out the new move, Sugar Book. I call it the monkey grinder.
Oh, Hugh, you are so groovy. Grind that monkey.
Jimmy and his friends cringe a little bit at the dancing that they're witnessing, and they decide to just walk on into the living room like he lives there, catching his parents off guard. He even walks up calling them mom and dad. When Hugh asks him what he's doing in his house, Jimmy connects the dots, realizing that they don't know who he is or who his friends are because they don't exist yet. Jimmy explains that the door was open and that they just let themselves in.
I'm Jimmy, and these are my friends, Carl and Sheen.
Jimmy, oh, I love that name.
Now look, I'm all for freedom, Buffalo Boy, but you guys, you can't just go busting into a cool cat's bachelor pad.
Bachelor pad? You mean you two aren't married yet?
A marriage is for the older scene, man. Besides, Judy Cakes only lives 5 minutes from here, and Hugh Doggy Dog's a free spirit. We let love rule. The wind is our minister, and true love is our chapel.
Oh, Hubie.
Judy says that Jimmy looks familiar, asking him if he's one of Hugh's neighbors, and Jimmy says yeah, just kind of brushing her off and rushing to take Hugh aside as quickly as he can. The two of them talk in private as Jimmy tries to explain that this might sound crazy, but he's going to meet a guy named Hank McSpanky soon.
Oh, you mean the smelly hobo with the funny eye?
You know him.
Yeah, I just gave him a ride the other day. McSpanky's got some wacky burger scheme that he wants me to invest my last $50
Hey,
but I...
do it.
What?
Invest in McSpanky's Burger Factory.
Yeah, I did consider it, but there's something very special I'm planning on using that money for. A man has to have his priorities.
Jimmy explains that McSpanky's Burger Factory is going to be huge one day, and that he's going to be filthy rich if he invests in the startup now. He even goes as far as telling him that someday when he has a son, he needs to make sure that he buys him the Encyclopedia of Infinite Knowledge.
Listen, Dad. Hugh, Hubie Doobie Doo.
Hey! Only the chicks can call me that.
Just like that, Jimmy says that he's gotta go, and we cut right back to the future. Upon arrival, Jimmy and his friends are a little bit let down to see that the lab is completely the same, thinking that maybe Hugh didn't take his advice. However, when they head upstairs, they find that the living room has a top-to-bottom makeover, complete with that 6-foot-tall duck statue that he wanted, a huge screen displaying a fire, chairs for him and Judy, and even just a couple piles of gold bars just chilling on the tile floor. Jimmy and his friends are flabbergasted by his new life. They walk up to his parents, who both seem to be on the phone.
Yeah, I don't care if he is my dad. Life-saving operations are expensive. I mean, it's my money, after all. If I get him some, I have less.
Jimmy tries to get his parents' attention, and they seem none too thrilled to even have him in their presence. He asks how they're doing, and they just blatantly ignore him and go right back to talking on their phones.
I mean, he's still got two lungs. Say one of them, for God's sake.
Hey, come on, I'm your son, and well...
Point?
Huh?
Tick-tock, tick-tock. Oops, looks like you just wasted another chunk of my life. Thanks a lot, Jerry.
It's Gary.
It's Jimmy.
Whatever, we don't have time for this kind of talking thing you want to do.
Jimmy's parents toss a gold bar over to Carl and Sheen, as well as Jimmy, saying bye-bye to them, more or less trying to pay them to go away. Jimmy asks what he's supposed to do with a gold bar, which seems to be the straw that breaks the camel's back for his parents.
He'll go!
He'll go?
Hilgo, could you take Jimmy up to his room? He's being all sunnish again.
Duh!
Oh, and get that contraption out of here. You know I don't like it in the house.
Duh!
As soon as Jimmy hits the floor, he is dumbfounded to see the entire collection of the Encyclopedia of Infinite Knowledge taking up an entire wall of his room. At first, he is totally psyched about it, but a few seconds later, his joy quickly fades to sadness as he realizes that being rich isn't as great as he thought it would be. His parents just aren't the same, and as a result, his home life is immediately in shambles. He decides that he needs to undo the damage that he's done, as we see him hop right back in his time machine to get his dad's $50 back. The future begins to turn back to normal, and we see Jimmy arise from the basement to check if everything is as it should be. He finds his dad sitting in their normal living room finishing up a duck that he was working on, as his mom comes into the room to talk to them both. She tells Jimmy that they had a talk about the encyclopedias and that they've decided that since it's for his education, they're just gonna postpone their family vacation to use that money for the set of books instead.
You know what? I'm over that. I heard it's not that great anyway. But thanks, though.
Jimmy's dad seems so relieved and happy that they don't have to forego their vacation, though he admits that anything for Jimmy's education is always a good cause.
Can I just ask you a question? Well, that $50 that you didn't invest with McSpanky, what did you spend it on?
Well, son, I spent it on your mother's wedding ring.
And it was all the money your father had to his name.
You see, it's about having your priorities in order, son. But man, if I had had $100 at the time, we'd be loaded right now!
Jimmy's dad continues to fantasize about all of the random duck-related things that he would do if he were filthy rich, and just like that, this episode comes to an end. Now, right out the gate, I have to say that there is just a lot that I feel about this episode. In a few ways, I'm able to relate to this one, but outside of that, the overall themes here and the whole story that was told is definitely one that has quite a few different layers that we need to unpack. There are a lot of aspects to this episode that shine an interesting layer on Hugh's character and reflect just how good of a partner, father, and overall person that he is. Zooming far out to see the big picture here, it's worth acknowledging that this episode serves more or less as a coming-of-age story for Hugh in a roundabout sort of way. Specifically speaking, it's not a coming-of-age story from start to finish, but if we take the pieces of the story that were given through context throughout this episode and piece them all together, there's certainly a coming-of-age story to be told. The story dates back to 15 years in the past, where Hugh is a bachelor in what I'm pretty sure is his early 20s with his own house. He's an avid disco fan who has kind of a bohemian style, for lack of a better word. We also learn that he's part of the free love movement. He says himself that marriage is for the old folks and that he's a free spirit. He says that the wind is their minister and true love is their chapel, implying that instead of being wed by a minister in a chapel, he finds love wherever the wind takes him. On top of that, when Jimmy calls him Hubie Doobie Doo, he stops him and says that only the chicks can call him that, using chicks as a plural term for women. Now, all of this, when I was a kid, completely went right over my head. As a naive child, I just assumed that he thought he was really cool and didn't want to get married to stick it to the man. As an adult though, putting the pieces together, it's obvious that they're implying Hugh was non-monogamous back then. Little does Judy know though, he has secret plans to leave behind his lifestyle and buy a ring to propose to her with so that this free spirit can settle down and start a family with this woman who he is just head over heels in love with. Now, what's interesting about this coming-of-age story, though, is that we see two different outcomes. One where Jimmy's dad does invest in McSpankies, and of course, the normal timeline where he doesn't invest in McSpankies. Regardless of how he chooses to go in this decision, though, we would see the outcome always result in him being committed to Judy and starting a family with her. This right here tells us that Hugh's love for Judy is a very true one. Whether they're living wealthy and throwing around gold bars or living on a tight budget, his love for his wife is true down to its core. In all reality, no matter the outcome, this episode shows him growing from a groovy cat that he once was, who disagreed with marriage, to becoming a family man who grows past that mindset and settles down with Judy to start a family. His love is even more shown by the fact that he spent the last bit of money that he had to his name on a wedding ring for her. Sure, it wasn't anything super extravagant, but that doesn't matter. The monetary value holds no bar over the quality of their relationship and his love for his wife. The gesture is bigger than anything here. This is one that I'll admit might hit me a little harder than most though. If you've watched my channel before, then you know how important that my wife and kids are to me. My wife and I started dating when we were sophomores in high school. About 2 years after we graduated, we would end up having our daughter. By the time that we found out she was pregnant, we already knew that we wanted to get married, and we had planned to do it when we were about 25, thinking we'd be able to afford this big, nice wedding by then. However, it was more important to both of us that we were married by the time that we had our daughter. Much like Hugh though, I didn't have much money to my name. I was working graveyard shift at a 24-hour Subway to help pay my rent and bills. We had gone ring shopping at a few different pawn shops and jewelry stores, hoping to find something that was not only in our budget, but also made my wife happy. But this task was a lot harder than we thought it would be, considering how tight our small budget was at the time. After what felt like ages of searching, we finally found one that my wife loved. However, it was unfortunately pretty far out of the range that we could afford. We decided that we would keep searching together, but in the background, I was going to work and hustling like the little social butterfly that I used to be to make as much tips as I possibly could. I was slinging sandwiches like a madman, hooking people up with extra veggies, and offering my little menu hacks to make their sandwiches even more tasty. As a result, I ended up making enough money to buy my wife the ring just in time for our little tiny intimate wedding. With that being said, seeing Hugh go through a similar situation tugged at my heartstrings a bit. I remember wanting more than anything to put a ring on my wife's finger and to pop the question to her, but being so worried about our finances that it felt like doing that was almost impossible. When it came down to it, the ring wasn't super expensive by any means, nor was our wedding. However, that didn't matter. A huge wedding and an expensive ring doesn't make for a happy marriage. Hugh and Judy are great proof of that. Hugh bought her a $50 wedding ring when he was down to the last of his money, and their relationship seems to be really healthy. As a husband, Hugh is stellar in my opinion. Though he may be a bit of a dingus at times, he's affectionate and he truly cares for and loves his wife. Seeing how Hugh used to be back in his bachelor days, in comparison to the man that we see in the future of the show, really adds to the picture that they're trying to paint as far as his coming-of-age story goes. That aspect, in combination with them telling us in the end what he spent that $50 on, really helped paint us this mental picture of him leaving behind his former lifestyle to pursue a family life exclusively with Judy. All things considered, Hugh certainly checks all of the boxes for a great husband and partner, in my opinion. Among those things, he's affectionate, caring, and he truly loves Judy. Now, as far as being a father goes, this episode does a great job of exemplifying everything that Hugh stands for as a dad. Throughout this series, we would see Hugh teach Jimmy a plethora of valuable life lessons. In this episode alone, there are a few that could be gathered. First of all, in this one, we see Hugh remind Jimmy that it's important for him to be thankful for the things that he already has when he's throwing a fit about the encyclopedias. This right here is not only a great lesson that all parents should teach their kids, but on a regular everyday adult level, it's a great reminder, all things considered. It's crucial to take a moment to take inventory of the things in life that you have to be thankful for. Whether times are good or bad, it's really important to keep things in perspective. At the point in the episode where Hugh gives Jimmy this advice, it comes across essentially in the form of ominous foreboding, though it's not clear from the start. This occurs before Jimmy makes the decision to go back in time to alter the timeline of his father's life. Looking back on this episode with the understanding of what's to come, it's clear that they're trying to foreshadow how different things would be if Jimmy had gotten what he wanted. This is something that, all in all, is a great lesson for Jimmy to learn, and I'm thankful that Hugh was able to help show him the way in the long run. Another really crucial life lesson that Hugh would teach Jimmy in this episode would be the importance of having your priorities in order. This is something that from a young age is important to grasp. However, it's something that I feel like we can all be mindful of and work on throughout our entire lives. It's important to assess your life and where your priorities are at regularly. This is something that Hugh preaches and does his best to teach Jimmy throughout this episode. We see him bring up the importance of priorities in the beginning, middle, and end of this episode. He brings it up when he's talking to Jimmy in the beginning, trying to teach him a lesson when he's throwing a fit about the encyclopedias. We see him bring it up in the past when he's in his early 20s, and we see him bring it up at the end when he explains to Jimmy how he spent his last $50 on a wedding ring for his mom. As far as Hugh is concerned, his biggest priority seems to be his family, which is an amazing quality to his character. The fact that they had him bring it up in the beginning, middle, and end of the episode across the past and current timelines is really a testament to him staying true to himself at his core, in my opinion. Sure, he may have changed and strayed away from his free-loving lifestyle, opting instead for monogamy and a life with Judy, but even back then, he was still preaching about how important it is to have your priorities. This right here tells me that the character and morals that he's had all along haven't changed, though his relationship and lifestyle dynamics may have. What's interesting to me though is that the only timeline that we don't see Hugh bring up priorities in was the one where he got filthy rich from investing in McSpankies. This to me was an indication of him losing his inner Hugh-ness as a result of being blinded by wealth and greed. On that note, we have to talk about how messed up rich Hugh and Judy are. Like, right out the gate, our introduction to this guy was a little strong to say the least. They start out by obviously showing how filthy rich he is. However, he's having a phone conversation with someone about how he refuses to help fund his own dad's life-saving operation because that would mean that he has less money. He says that he doesn't care that it's his dad, and even goes as far as saying that he has 2 working lungs and that he should just sell one to make the money. Let that soak in for a sec. Hugh's dad was potentially dying, and he's sitting on this massive pile of wealth, refusing to even help pay for a life-saving surgery. All the meanwhile, though, he's literally paying Jimmy and his friends in gold bars to get lost. From top to bottom, this was all just so unlike the Hugh Neutron that we all know. Not only did he refuse to even give his son a second of his time to listen, but he was straight up rude to him for even having the audacity to want to talk to him in the first place. It was really sad to see him abandon all of his priorities in favor for riches and building wealth. There's so much more to life than money, and if there's any flaw I'd say that Hugh has, that's definitely one. It's clear that him being rich probably should never be a reality because he's one to let it go to his head rather quickly. Even in the end of the episode, he was talking about how if he was rich, he'd turn Retroville into a duck town and force all of the inhabitants to have webbed feet. It's clear that money would make Hugh be a vastly different person than he is inside, so all things considered, it's for the best that their family exists the way that it is normally. I will say though, specifically this part of the episode made me feel really bad for Jimmy. Imagine the whiplash of being a kid who has a healthy parental bond with your parents, knowing that they love you and care for you, only to be immediately thrusted into a timeline where those same exact 2 parents hate your guts and despise the idea of having you in their presence. This right here hurt really bad. Knowing the kind of relationship that Jimmy has with his parents definitely makes this part of the episode sting a lot more. With that being said though, in all honesty, it's kind of surprising that Jimmy even existed in this future. Like, his dad's investment in McSpankies would completely alter the timeline of their lives. Instead of buying a ring, he would end up making that investment, which would in turn delay him proposing. This could have resulted in so many different things. The first to come to mind, though, would be him and Judy not staying together, which could have resulted in Jimmy not existing in the first place. Him delaying his proposal could definitely have been an issue for Judy. By all means, when we see them in the past, you can tell that she loves him and embraces the lifestyle that Hugh chooses to live, but when Jimmy says, "Wait, you two aren't married yet?" she kind of shoots Hugh this look with raised eyebrows that more or less screams, "Yeah, Hugh, why aren't we married yet?" With that being said though, the butterfly effect is a crazy thing, and it's definitely something that we're going to circle back to in just a little bit. In the meantime though, I have to bring up Jimmy's behavior throughout this episode. First of all, this all starts because of his interest in this huge set of encyclopedias, which his family just can't afford at the moment. From there, he starts acting like a brat about it. I definitely have to point out how manipulative it was that he went to his dad to talk about it after his mom already said no. Like, the fact that he did that in the first place isn't exactly an issue because that's something that a lot of kids do all the time. It's a simple tactic that most kids use to get what they want. However, in Jimmy's case, it's a little bit more messed up. First of all, Jimmy is a genius. He knows exactly how his parents are, and when one says no and he goes to the other, he knows exactly what he's doing. The way he went about approaching his dad, though, just kind of felt extra manipulative. Especially when you consider that when he brought it up to his dad, he blatantly told Jimmy that he isn't in charge of the finances. However, despite that, Jimmy continued to push, hoping to convince his dad to buy the books that he knows they can't afford. Then, when both of his parents said no, he decides to alter the timeline to make it so that he can get what he wants. Keep in mind too, this is all for some encyclopedias. He jumped through all of these hoops and manipulated his parents, all in the name of getting an overpriced set of books that are basically obsolete by the time they get off the printing press, because they cover topics that would change over time as the world continues to evolve. On top of that, the internet, though it was different at this time, was a thing and would very much so make printed encyclopedias pretty much worthless. There really wasn't much need for encyclopedias for Jimmy whatsoever on top of that. He has a vast wealth of knowledge stored in his brain, and what he doesn't have, he could likely get from Vox, his personal computer, or even Goddard, his robot dog who constantly answers questions for him. Though this episode did a great job of showing us Hugh's true colors and who he is as a person, it also did a great job of showing us just how selfish Jimmy can be at times. His actions in this episode were certainly a testament to that, as he was willing to do whatever it took, even if it meant massively altering the past in order to get what he wanted. Like I said earlier, the butterfly effect is a crazy thing, and his actions in the past could have definitely had a massive effect on his life as a whole. One thing that I can't help but wonder though, is that if Hugh is filthy rich and clearly enjoys a lavish lifestyle, why do they still live in their modest home in Retroville instead of like a big mansion meant for a millionaire who carries around gold bars? Clearly he could have afforded a bigger house, but for some reason that wasn't a part of this reality. I can't help but imagine how much more complex that the story to this episode would have been if they had traveled back to the present and Jimmy's parents didn't live in that house anymore. But who knows? Furthermore, it seemed as if the living room was the only part of their house that really got a remodel, which was kind of strange. They have this massive fortune, yet for some reason, Jimmy's lab is no different than it was before. On top of that, while they're sitting in their super fancy living room, Jimmy's bedroom seems no different than it was before, save for the wall of encyclopedias. It was kind of odd that Jimmy's room and really everywhere else except for the living room seemed relatively unchanged, even though Hugh is extravagantly wealthy. Now, by all means, just because you have a ton of money doesn't mean that you're going to choose to spend it on altering your house and lifestyle completely, but the way that this was portrayed made it seem like they spend all their money on remodeling their space and didn't really care to invest in upgrading Jimmy's portion of the house. I mean, they didn't even buy a chair for Jimmy in the living room. That whole room just really felt like it was unwelcome to children in general. Bearing in mind, of course, that we really only do get to see a small portion of the house in this reality, and this is just a speculation pieced together by the bits of context that we were given in the episode. Moving on from there though, in a more lighthearted direction, I definitely have to bring up a few things here. First of all, that scene where Jimmy and his friends are in the past, Jimmy decides to walk right into the living room and say hi to his mom and dad, thinking that they're gonna know who he is. Then it hits him. This is the past, and he doesn't exist, so of course they don't know who he is. Not gonna lie to you guys, this drove me nuts a little bit. Jimmy is not only a genius, but he's definitely not lacking in common sense. He, of all people, should have known that his parents wouldn't recognize him. It was just kind of weird for him to blatantly walk right into the living room like that. It's things like this which remind us that though Jimmy is incredibly smart, he is still actually just a child. With that being said, sometimes common sense might go right over his head. On top of that though, I also couldn't help but question how Hugh and Judy don't remember this stuff happening. He went back in time and met them in their early 20s, which would be a point where they should be able to remember his face and recognize in the future when he starts to grow up that it was him who they had met all those years ago. In the alternate timeline where Hugh is filthy rich, you'd think that he would remember the person who gave him the ultimate investment advice, and in the future connect the dots that that was actually Jimmy. Furthermore, in this episode, we see Jimmy go to the past a second time to fix everything. We don't know exactly what he did while he was there, but if he did go talk to his dad for a second time and tell him not to make that investment, then I'm even more positive that his dad would have remembered him coming to talk to him in the past. On the other hand though, if Jimmy went back in time and stopped himself from talking to his dad in the first place, then the result would be Hugh and Judy not having a recollection of it because it would have never happened to begin with. With that in mind, there's only one answer that I can think of as to why he and Judy may not remember, and that would be the likely extracurricular activities that came with that flower child wherever the wind may take me lifestyle, if you know what I'm saying. On that same note though, I gotta say that the timeline of this episode is kinda funny. The lifestyle that they show Jimmy's parents living is one that was very popular in the 1970s. I gotta stress that the term free love is one that I kind of use for lack of a better word, considering that the free love movement originally was intended to separate the state from sexual and romantic matters, such as marriage, birth control, and adultery. The goal in mind being that these kind of issues should be left up to the people and not the government. However, in the 60s and 70s, that term was adopted to encompass a lifestyle of casual love. This is certainly still a thing that might be just as strong today as it was back in the 60s and 70s, considering the amount of people nowadays who are under the umbrella of ethical non-monogamy. However, after the late 70s and early 80s, the movement slowed down heavily. I bring all of this up because this episode portrays Hugh and Judy 15 years in the past. To give a more accurate timeline, Jimmy is an 11-year-old kid. It's confirmed that his birthday is March 14th of 1991. That would mean that this show would take place in 2002. Now, if Jimmy is going back 15 years in the past, that would bring him to right about 1987, meaning that his dad was listening to disco and living this kind of lifestyle in the late 80s, almost the 90s, which is kind of funny considering that the era of disco kind of ended in 1980. On top of that, Hugh actually wasn't born until 1968. This is really interesting because the free love movement that Hugh was preaching would reach its height in the mid-1960s as part of a bigger peace movement by many people who were against the Vietnam War that was going on at the time. One of the most notable events of this movement being the Summer of Love, an event that took place in the summer of 1967, a year before Hugh was even born, in San Francisco. Now, of course, you don't have to be born in that time to be part of that lifestyle, obviously. There are a lot of people in this day and age who live that flower child kind of lifestyle. However, I thought it was interesting how they portrayed Hugh's entire life back then, when during that time in the late 80s, not very many people were living that kind of lifestyle. Timeline aside, and all things considered, this is actually a really great episode in my opinion. I really enjoyed this one as a kid, and even more now as an adult. On top of being an episode that I can relate to, this one is really adorable as it showcased Jimmy as a young kid learning about his parents' history for the first time. That's an interesting moment in every kid's life, and it's one that I recognize isn't always a sunshine and rainbows kind of situation. However, seeing Jimmy learn about how his parents' love blossomed over time, and learning about the choice that his dad made in spending the last of his money on a ring for Judy really resulted in this episode being a very heartwarming one at its core. Personally, I feel like this is an excellent episode to showcase Hugh not only as a father, but also as a husband. Hugh is an excellent dad, and he's proven this across the course of this series. Though he can be kind of dim-witted at times, he is still a great example for Jimmy to look up to as a role model. But what do you think? Do you think that Hugh is a great dad? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love reading your guys' feedback. I have to do something incredibly important right now, and that's give a huge shout out to my patrons over on Patreon, especially those of you who are in the true 90s kids tier. Your support every month is so incredibly appreciated, and I cannot thank you guys enough for supporting me directly in my YouTube journey. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like and give me a high five down in the comments, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Got a blast.
We live in Quackertown, and I would require every member of Quackertown to have webbed feet and a duck bill. I would go to the doctor myself and have the webbed nose put in.